This conference will now be recorded.
Any changes to the agenda, anyone? Okay, we'll keep it as is. So as you heard, it is recorded. And in general, I think if people could stay muted and if non-commissioners could keep their video off until they're trying to get my attention, it makes it kind of a little easier for me to monitor, you know, if someone's trying to get my attention. Thank you. Open to the public for items not related to the agenda. And you could either turn your video on, you could wave, or you can chat. It looks like Chris Trombley, you have something? And you are muted still, so you can unmute.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much. I'll just be real brief. Thanks for allowing me a moment to speak. Chris Trombley, I'm the new chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. I just wanted to advocate today. You know, the city's tight housing supply and strong demand continues to make affordable housing a challenge at many income levels. And you know, what we found that one of the few levers that we can pull that does not require taxpayer dollars is to capitalize on opportunities where we might be able to increase the housing supply while aligning with city priorities. So we're petitioning the Planning Commission as you review lots to shift open land between residential and non-residential. If you see an opportunity where we can convert that to possibly a usable housing supply, you know, we ask you to consider the impact of that decision, and if there's an opportunity where we can have a positive impact on the supply. So thank you, and you know, I'll try to hang on. We didn't bring any specifics. There were some potential candidates the committee was looking at. We just ask you to keep affordable housing in mind while you're reviewing those parcels. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. And you know, we have been looking at changing some land use in some areas, so I'm sure that'll be of interest, you know, to areas where, you know, maybe mixed use might make more sense than all non-residential. So let's see, anyone else have anything for items not related to the agenda? Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat box either. So does anyone have any announcements? Any commissioners? Monica?
There we go. I'm working on my phone and I have my laptop up so I can see other stuff. This is not on the agenda. I just wanted to say I've recently seen a number of articles about some really smart city planning relating to energy efficiency. So I just wanted to put this out there again. I know I've brought this up before, but as we come to the end of developing our PUDs, I really do hope that we have a chance to look at the PUD requirements in connection with the kinds of things communities are doing to improve energy efficiency. Example, X% of roofs facing a solar friendly direction. So I just, there's just been a lot of articles out. I meant to share some and I didn't have a chance to do it, but I wanted to just ask that we have agenda time to bring that back in with the PUDs. That's all.
Okay, anyone else? Paul, are there any other staff announcements?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things that happened that wrapped up in this legislative session at the state level. There were two bills that were passed and approved by the governor that relate to your work. One was S-237. This was a bill largely related to affordable housing. And the biggest components of it are that effective upon passage, the allowances for accessory dwelling units are a little more broad than they used to be. And so statewide, effective yesterday, the owner must live on the property. It must be an owner-occupied property, but not necessarily an owner-occupied principal dwelling unit. It also says that the minimum that the allowable size that a municipality can set as its floor is either 30% of the size of the house, which was the previous rule, or 900 square feet, whichever is larger. So for some smaller homes, previously their cap was much lower. Now it's increased. There's some other changes as well that are a little less applicable in South Burlington, but we'll be bringing some amendments to you probably in the next round, just to clear up any inconsistencies, because the way that the legislation reads and works is it applies regardless. So if there's a conflict between our rules and the legislation will rule anyway. So we'll try to get that into a round whenever you next do a round, so that it's tidy and clean and members of our community have a clear understanding. Monica?
I just wanted to say I think that's great to hear, because I remember that we've had discussion about some residents wanting to live in the smaller unit and not having that right. So I think that to have this accessory dwelling unit. So I think that that's really good news. And I think the Affordable Housing Committee will be happy to hear that too.
The second one that I'm a little less familiar with is S54. This is the cannabis bill. And there is some, previously the old bill defined cannabis dispensaries very, very narrowly. And the Planning Commission adopted some changes that were optional at the time, but it was tagged very precisely to that former definition of a cannabis dispensary, which was highly, highly regulated. There are some new provisions in there, and I'll get together with our city attorney and we'll lay out some options for you in the forthcoming meetings about what your opportunities are.
Right.
Those are my announcements.
Thank you. Ted, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, one quick thing, Paul. Did you say owner occupied? The owner has to clarify that again, where the owner's
Right.
function.
Previously, at the state level and in our local regulations, the minimum that the state said and that we followed was that the owner had to live, it was an owner occupied principal dwelling unit. So if you had a main house and an accessory apartment, the owner had to live in the main house. It was optional for municipalities to be more permissive. We had not yet made that determination to be more permissive. Now the state minimum is that it's an owner occupied property, meaning that the owner could live in the accessory dwelling unit and rent out the house, or vice versa.
When you say owner occupied property, okay, so the owner actually has to be on site, you're saying?
Correct, but they
Okay,
could
good.
now live in the accessory apartment.
Yeah.
So let's
Got
say
it.
it was a senior who was a couple that was downsizing. They didn't need the full house. They just wanted a little small apartment, but they wanted to stay on the property. They could now rent out the house itself to a different household.
Got it. Good.
Great. Well, we can move on to agenda item 4, which is to look at some amendments to the LDRs. There's 4 here, and we had a memo describing each of them in our packet. Paul, do you want to walk us through these? I think, these should look very familiar, except for the last one, which was just presented as an idea. And Paul, you are on mute.
Abiding by the rules too closely. The 4 that are on here, the first 2 are specifically related to what you were speaking about last month, which is to allow increased lot coverage in the urban design overlay. The first option is to do it via on-site civic space. The second option is to do it via purchase of TDRs. The third one is something, as I described in my memo, that had been in front of you about a year ago. It's coming forward because it's directly tied to the last one. These amendments would need to happen in order to allow for the increased lot coverage via on-site open space. There's sort of smaller open spaces that are being allowed in the form-based code and here. And then the last one is just one that is, as I said, or as Jessica said, it's been our practice the last 6 months. It's been very well received to just get rid of the requirement for big giant paper copy rolls of plans. We've been moving in that direction for a while, and this seemed like the time to just do it.
Paul, I had a question about that. Oh, maybe I'm jumping ahead. Never mind, I'll wait till we get there.
I mean, you can ask a question if you want, Monica.
Sorry, well, it was just on that paper business. Just so I'm clear though, the city clerk's office will always keep a paper copy in their files of anything ultimately pertaining to any property, right?
Correct. So if it's a deed, or if it's what's called a Mylar, the official final adopted record of property lines, that all goes in the clerk's office. It's all in paper. It's all in the vault. This is about the applications materials to the DRB.
Great.
So I'm happy to answer any questions that commissioners might have. You're also welcome to just proceed whenever you like. If you're ready to warn a public hearing. In there is also the Planning Commission report that you would, if you were ready, could make a motion with the warning of the hearing to approve that report.
Okay, go ahead.
So
Brad.
I will make a motion to warn a public hearing for changes to LDR 17-13A, 17-13B, 19-06, and 20-18A, and also accept the staff report that supports these changes.
Second.
And Bernie, does Tuesday, November 10th work for you? Work for folks?
Yep, fine with me.
Okay, any discussion about the motion from anyone?
Not the motion, but I do have some questions.
Yeah, questions about any of these? Go ahead, Monica.
Okay, so in the TDR related one, very excited to have this chance to do these. I just wanted to clarify in my, novice way of reading these. I'm seeing, I would like to better understand exactly how much square footage a single TDR is purchasing. In one location, it seems to tie it to 2,500 square feet, and in another, it seems to specifically say 10,000 square feet. I think it's my misunderstanding of the sections. So
sure, Monica, a TDR, as you had discussed at your last meeting, would be 10,000 square feet. That's one TDR.
Of lot coverage.
Right, sorry, 10,000 square feet of lot coverage is equal to one TDR. And one TDR is 0.83 acres of land, because that's the inverse of 1.2 units an acre in the southeast quadrant.
So is it?
What gets a little bit trickier here is that up until this point, TDRs were only ever purchased in whole increments because it was a house.
Mm-hmm.
There's no 2/3 of a dwelling unit. It's either a dwelling unit or not a dwelling unit. In speaking with the city attorney, she felt that it would be best if we could try to approximate the amounts of actual lot coverage that a property owner or applicant is looking to get. And so that's why we're proposing that you can purchase it in increments of 2,500 square feet, or 1/4 of a TDR. It gets a little bit tricky. Imagine a scenario where somebody only needed, say, 1,000 square feet, or only asked for 1,000 square feet. And then they're approved, they've purchased 10,000 square feet, and then later, for whatever reason, as part of all of your overhauls of the regulations, you change the formula in, say, a year's time when you're doing work on the TDR program. That puts that 9,000 square feet into sort of a nebulous area. Whereas if it's in smaller increments that are closer to what they actually needed, then that's a little less of a challenging situation. So that's why that's there. Does that make sense?
That makes sense on this side, but what happens on the sending side? So if somebody is going to buy a quarter of a TDR, what gets pinned as conserved then on the sending side?
So
do
in
they
that
determine
case,
that?
it would be a quarter of 0.83 acres. So I know that that's complicated math in there, but about 2/10 of an acre would be what it is. We tried
And
to figure out some way to always go with round numbers, but it turns out that the metric system is not as popular in this country as I'd like it to be.
Yeah, and the seller would be able to choose where that 1/4 of the 0.83 would be, right?
Yes, nothing has changed in that end of it presently.
Okay. And
So
then my
Tara-
other, okay, so that makes sense to me now that you've said it, as long as it's clear to people that are purchasing. Because actually, I don't know if it says anywhere in here about this being able to, I know it says increments of not less than the 2,500, but would it make sense to explain that that could be a partial TDR somewhere? Just language that might
during
clarify
we did a broad brush legal review. When we do the detailed review, I'll make sure that that question is looked at closely.
Okay, and then my other question was just for clarification. I think that the Planning Commission's intention with this is to, within the urban design overlay district, for the TDRs to be used strictly for lot coverage, not for incremental units at this point. I just wanted to make sure that they could not be interpreted differently. Like if somebody says, well, sure, I want 10,000, I want 100,000 more square feet of lot coverage because I want to add another section to my apartment building. So is it clear that additional, at this point, although we may add it later, at this point, is it clear that these TDRs in this district do not relate to residential units?
That is our understanding. That's the drafting. We will verify that with the city attorney, but it is the only thing being increased is lot coverage, not building coverage, not height, not setbacks, not additional dwelling units on the property.
And again, what's the, Paul, what's the swamp provision? If I send over all of my swampland?
At this time, Ted, because this was just a narrow sort of quote unquote pilot project for it, nothing has changed in the sending areas. Okay. I know that there's an ongoing discussion with the commission as part of TDRs about whether you want to change that as you sort of do the bigger amendment, but nothing is at the moment changed from the sending areas.
Okay, great.
Any other commissioner comments or questions on these?
I thought everything else looked great.
Well, I want to make sure I didn't have any public questions also. Does anyone from the public have comments or questions on these items? I don't see anything in the chat. And I'm not seeing any hand waving. Okay, then we get to the question. All in favor of these items as Bernie's motion, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Okay, I heard Paulingo's. Ted, did you?
Yep, aye. Yep.
Okay, and that was all of us. That was unanimous. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jeff, for getting those ready for us. Let's see. So next thing on the agenda is the work session, continued work session on the forested habitat areas. So at our request from the last meeting, we got to a point where we had kind of decided on an approach and had asked staff to help us kind of zoom in on different areas where the habitat blocks were located. And I am going to share my screen. And Okay, so right now, can people see the memo up here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I figured what might be good, Paul and staff made this really amazing story map that I am going to kind of drive for this discussion. I believe you can see it up. And this is such a great tool. So Paul, thank you so much for making this for us. I really loved that we could have kind of the mapping feature as well as all the notes. So we were all charged with kind of going through this on our own, reading the notes in the background so that we could have a focused discussion on this. So what I was thinking is as we go through each of these, for an example, here is the first one. We've already kind of individually looked at these. We have a recommendation that was in the notes. So I guess what I was thinking is if we could kind of limit our discussion to, if people have questions or concerns or a different suggestion for a different recommendation, we'll talk about those. But otherwise, if people are generally in agreement, we'll try to move through these. So I guess just wave and or call out, if you feel like you want to do something different than the recommendation. So Monica, are you waving?
I just had one comment that the colors in the legend, this is an awesome tool. Thank you so much for the time. The colors in the legend were a little bit tricky to tell the difference between yellow and orange, which is either habitat block or wetland 2, I think. So for example, in this first one, and there's some others in other maps, but there's this yellow part towards the street, and I didn't know what that was.
Can you see my cursor actually? I'm kind of hovering around. So, to me, this looks like the wetland.
So that would be wetland 2. Okay. Just curious, no comment on it. I just was asking.
Generally speaking, I was trying to put orange represented hazards. Yellow is the 500-year floodplain, because I know you were talking about that a little bit differently. Blue is steep slopes, and dark blue is very steep slopes. And then green is the forested block. The one thing that's a little hard to read in here is that the NRP is also shown, and that's a green band, like a green line. So there's one that Jessica's on, and then there's another one in the right-hand side of the screen there. It's hard to get all these colors to work together.
Okay, so with a lot of these, we had kind of an intro slide and then a recommendation slide. So in general here, the idea was to remove the block from this roadway and, generally follow the edge or, make the edge of the NRP adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions, comments on this one?
Nope.
Hearing none, then I guess we'll say this is we'll generally approve this. So I guess then we can move on. So South Village, similarly here we have the overview slide. We have the recommendation slide. So the idea here is aligning to the approved development plan so that it's kind of clear when someone looks at these habitat blocks that you would either expect them to remain or not be there based on the approved development.
Right, and so can I ask on this one, the blue, bubbles of being removed is because there was already a plan approved, and that's what this is trying to reflect.
That's right, Monica. This is exactly, this is a hand drawing, but the blue areas are South Village Phase 3 as approved and as under construction now.
Okay, and can I just ask, the red box that's recommended in the lower left saying change from NR to NRP, it's a bit of a finger and it's disconnected by a road. Is there any value in that part also being removed from the habitat block? Because I can't tell what it's connecting to, except maybe, is there NRP below it?
Basically, all that is being shown here is to reflect the approved plans for South Village, permanent open space areas and development areas. So that's basically what was tried to be done years ago, but they didn't quite match it up. I would say if there's any controversy or concern about anything on this map, you don't need to make any of these changes. What's approved is approved. What's not, what's approved for conservation is approved for conservation. So it doesn't really make too much difference either way.
Okay, that helped. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess unless anyone has any objection, it seems like a nice idea to me to kind of match what is expected by the development out there.
Well, I guess my only question is if it's already an approved plan, I guess, I'm kind of hearing what Paul had to say, and that's, why would we change anything if the plan is already approved, and it's going to be built out in accordance with the plan? Or so I guess the corollary to that, Paul, would be, is there a chance that the developer may come back in the future and want to change the plan where having this may be of value?
Well, it's possible. Somebody can always apply to modify a plan. It would involve a change to the master plan. And so if you wanted to have areas that were currently approved as conservation be able to be, or as open space, be able to be built on, then you could do that. This would essentially codify, if you did it this way, it would essentially codify that the areas that have been approved for development as being the only development areas, which is more or less how the 2006 rules were put together. The golf course was arranged that way, and you see Dorset Farms next to it. So that would be the effect of
Yeah, Duncan?
making other changes.
I guess my question to you, Paul, is the areas we're looking at changing from, is that neighborhood residential, NR?
Yes, yep.
To National Resource Protection. Are those areas so those are areas that were not part of a master plan to be built on?
Correct. Those were areas that were approved as open space in the master plan.
Okay, so there was no intention to build there, but that could change in the future if we do not change them to NRP?
Conceivably, yeah.
Well, but it sounds like there was already a commitment to conserve them. So that would be a pretty big change, because the expectation is that with what has already been built, those are expected to have been conserved. And this mapping would just be mirroring that.
Is it only conserved by site plan based on the development at the time, or was it actually set aside?
I believe it's in the deeds. So it would be up to the homeowners association in the future to change that. I can verify that if you like, though. I'm not 100% certain of that.
I mean, clearly I think we want to have that conserved. So I guess, my thought would be if we felt that the plan was solid enough that some future homeowners association or developer couldn't come in and, submit a new application and have it be approved, that, we're better off changing it. If we felt that it was really kind of set in concrete or, something durable that would make it very difficult to change, then maybe it's not so critical to change this. But I think we clearly want to make sure that it's conserved now and in the future. So if this is the best way to do it by changing it, we should probably just do that.
Yeah, I agree with the recommendation.
Mm-hmm. I would agree too.
So it sounds like kind of leave with the recommendation as shown on the screen.
Yep,
Yep.
that's where we ended up.
So moving on to the Dorset Farms area, you can see again the hazards in yellow, the NRP with the green line, the forest core, forest edge, and then these green, kind of lighter green lines, just as a reminder, are the connection locations that we've added. So recommendations, these weren't drawn on the map, but one was to kind of change the edge of the NRP up here to include this bump out potentially. I know at the last meeting, Monica had talked about maybe if we're adding to NRP, we should take it away. And, CF just pointed out, here's a spot where there's a house in the NRP. If we needed to do a realignment for balance, we could talk about doing things like that. So
I was going to ask also, and I don't know how this is possible, but the connector right there is obviously important. You can just see visually that that's an important connector. But connectors can be moved and recreated elsewhere. And just hypothetically, these are the kind of things that I was looking at when reviewing these. If somebody at Dorset Farms wanted to expand that neighborhood moving north to that other lot above, and everything worked out to permit that, this particular corridor to me could shift up a parcel and still provide the safe passage that's required. And I don't know how to mark that. So if there's a suggestion, Paul, for how to make that allowable, it would be great.
I think the way it's written is that this could potentially get shifted to this side of the property, but it would need to be accommodated if the property was redeveloped. That's how I thought it worked, Paul.
Right. I think that's accurate. What's tricky is Monica's suggestion that it might function on the property to the north, which is it potentially could. The key is that it's connecting the large area on the left side of the screen to the right to the area on the right side of the screen. Because it's a different property, it wouldn't be in the immediate purview of the property owner in the south to just move it to a different property. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe with concurrence, if they applied together to the DRB and said, the property on the north is agreeing to take on this habitat block and the property on the south is, figured out a deal with them, then that would be fine. Mm-hmm. But it would take the concurrence of that other property owner, or you would need to move it yourselves as a policy change either now or somebody could come to you in 10 years and say, hey, we've got this different idea about how to do a zoning change, and you could evaluate it then.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, is just knowing that there might be some flexibility, but that it's clear that a connector is necessary in somewhere in these 4 parcels. So.
Yeah, the tricky thing is it has to be assigned to somebody, because if everybody points to somebody else, then nobody's responsible for it.
Yeah, good.
Ted, was that the direction?
Yeah, exactly. It really is a significant corridor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think putting it here makes sense to me because it's widest here, and an animal wouldn't have to go across these driveways and kind of mowed area versus, here there is actually a tree line at least.
Well, that's what they'd have to recreate in my mind. If they were to move it, they need to move it and recreate a private, a protected covered space.
Paul, quick question for you.
Yeah.
Dorset Farms has some land that I know is conserved, but is that the land in front of the development?
The land, can you scroll down a little bit, Jessica? So they have land that is conserved on both sides of Midland Avenue as you enter into Dorset Farms.
Okay.
And then also across the street and down, there's a big field there.
Mm-hmm.
that property is conserved as part of Dorset Farms. So even though there's no restriction shown on there, that's a property that the both at the local level and the Act 250 level that's tied in.
Okay. I didn't know how far up that extended. I don't think it extends above that though.
There's a little tiny bit on the northwest corner of, well, not a little tiny bit. There's a small area in the northwest corner of Dorset Farms that's part of their parcel. So Jessica, if you were to zoom in above northwest of the D in Dorset Farms, you'll see that there's a gray property line. Oops. There, that's part of Dorset Farms also a little bit, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so in general, the recommendation was to bump out the NRP to include this forest area, potentially.
Yep.
Okay, I'm not hearing any negative pieces of that, so we can.
No, only though to consider how to additionally provide that protection for the corridor in either its current location or a future somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and I think that we have language in the text of chapter 12 that talks about that and how they can move.
Okay.
Okay. Hidden meadow cobblestone. So it might be hard to see, but this green line comes down. This is the NRP boundary, and it juts down here and across and up, but the forest block extends across it. So the idea would be to, just add this area to NRP. So the NRP boundary would kind of more closely follow the forest area.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Okay. So Highland Terrace, that seems like that didn't load right. Okay, Highland Terrace. So on here we have the NRP boundary, the forest areas, as well as the steep slopes are shown on here for reference. Then we have the recommendation, which would be to kind of add this area into the NRP, but remove the fingers. And I think this is one of the fingers that we had specifically talked about at our last meeting as an example. So, any questions about this? Duncan, go ahead.
Yeah, Paul, I just had a question. I know those lots you said on the east side of Highland Terrace are very long and narrow, and kind of the situation of where the houses are precludes from a lot of infill. But has there been any interest or attempt to do any sort of infill on any of those lots?
There has been several properties on the other side of Highland Terrace. So if you zoomed in a little bit, Jessica, you can see a few of them existing.
These ones here?
Yeah, so there's those ones, and then there's been actually 2 applications in the last year for properties north of that.
We had a presentation on that at one time, I believe, didn't we?
Yep.
This is, we had one of the residents in this area come to us just a couple weeks ago about the area.
Right, and you saw the first interim zoning application that you saw last year that council had referred to was where the H is in Highland Terrace. There's been some inquiries also, Duncan, from, I think there's maybe a change in ownership taking place in the large corner property in the southeast corner there.
Mm-hmm.
Next one to the right.
But nothing at where we're looking at moving the NRP out.
Well, that one. So that's a pretty large property that goes all the way from where Jessica's pointing her mouse all the way over to the O in change from.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a moderate change there. So that would be a change as to what can happen on that property. There is a fairly steep
slopes line pretty much covers most of that, it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
so there's that elevation change there.
Yeah, so the way that the steep slopes are showing on the map, the dark blue ones are the 25+% ones that you were proposing be basically no development, and the light blue are the ones of where caution would need to be applied. So it's not necessarily a no development, but it is pretty steep, and it's not surprising that the homes are all above that. But this would be one of the more significant changes of the whole set. So I did want to highlight that.
The finger in the south, yeah, that one right there. There have been some dens there. I forget which neighbor said on their property. They have, again, I think of the cat. What's
Like
the
The lynx or the bobcat?
yeah, Bob. There's a bobcat den in there. Whether that makes any, difference there, I don't know. I'm thinking almost cutting it in half because I think it's more to the west and than the east, but it is a habitat for whatever that's worth.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add to that. I was just going to say, when you look at that finger over there, that it's actually like two fingers, it is directly, the lower one in particular is directly connected to a lot of NRP land, and you can see from across the street that has to be a nice corridor as well, because there's a long hedge there. It would really be nice if, rather than moving the entire thing, if at least there was a connector. I know that there's a road there, but if there was a protected corridor of some reasonable width that would replace the need for the whole block, but at least to connect the core that's up above down to the NRP that's across the way. Because the only other connection to the NRP is all the way on the other side of the cobblestone circle. So I bet that there's actually a lot of natural connection in there.
Yeah, and we don't need to remove this. It's just, at the time it looked like it jutted out, but Monica, you're really right. This over here is NRP land, which is very close by. So I mean,
yeah.
There's also, if you go up one screen, Jessica, there's a very steep slope in portion of that.
yeah, sorry. Let me here.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, maybe we leave it as is. Maybe this is a spot where it's not really a finger because it's really connecting over here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and,
I mean,
and a large chunk of it is steep slope and not really, easily developable anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
Yeah, I'd be inclined to leave it, and then, we have public hearings, so.
Okay. So at this point, this camp head thing will it'll remain forest block.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So technology park, the recommendation here was keep the habitat block. There are some wetlands here, and as well as the river corridor.
Paul, isn't there a building being built down near there somewhere? I just drove by that area yesterday.
There
on
is.
89.
Jessica, can you click on the words that says has been approved on the site?
Oh, yes. This might take a second to load, but it will come. I was quite excited about how these were linked.
So what you're seeing there is the far right-hand side of that is where this habitat block is, but a much more significant area was identified as wetlands as part of the review of the FedEx distribution facilities. So they're not touching anything anywhere near there.
Okay, yeah, this is the wetland and the wetland buffer. So if we go back to our forest map, that looks like that's the area over here. So the development portion's happening.
Yeah, it's actually even further to the west than that, Jessica. It's more like where you're, yeah.
Okay. Great. So any comment? Then we'll keep.
That's good. Yeah, so it looks good the way we've got it done.
Yep.
Okay. So looking at the area around the airport, this large kind of river connected habitat block was the third rank, so a highly ranked one, and this one here in the middle was one of the lowest ranked, the 23rd ranked. So just for reference, you can kind of zooming in, kind of looking at hazards and slopes. There's a lot of overlap. And recommendation was, retain this large one over here with the Muddy Brook corridor, but consider removing this small kind of disconnected one.
I have an update to that, Jessica. I just before this meeting participated in the airport master plan review. They're updating their master plan, and they identified most of that area as wetland, as you see in there. So that they're not anticipating anything taking place in that area. As I said in my notes, I think, just in the off chance that there is some kind of airport activity in the corner of the habitat block, this might be an area to just remove, but functionally it's likely to stay exactly the way it is.
Okay.
Okay.
Nods.
Yep.
Okay, this one is the one that's, you can see it being bordered by roadways completely within the interstate right-of-way. Oops, and I ran away from it too quickly.
Yeah,
So,
I just wanted to, oops.
there, sorry.
So I had a comment on the recommendation, which was, since it's not really in our jurisdiction anyway, why? But I guess what we haven't discussed is what tool will the public be able to see these habitat blocks with? Will we be adding a map? And my thinking was, if we are hopefully going to be doing that in some way, I understand that it's not our jurisdiction, but it is, in terms of connectivity, I think important to be able to visually identify that's an important habitat block. So I was going to recommend that we, in fact, do map it, even though we know that it's not something we can control.
Did you see
That's fine as long as we note that.
Yeah.
I think as long as we note that we don't control that portion, no problem with that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we have our hazards going through as well, and it's really the same thing. Well, kind of, except that's water. So I guess there might be state regs on that.
any issues with that you see from the interstate perspective, Paul?
Not really. I guess my only significant question would be, right now the city's going through the Interstate 89 corridor study, and some of the options being looked at, or one of the options being looked at, is a sort of redo of that interchange entirely that would be affecting less land and improving transportation, but it might touch some of the forest block. Regulatorily, as I said, I don't think it would have any impact, but whether there's any sort of head scratching about whether the city is for or against that might become a subject area. So if you'd like, I can think on this one a little bit and maybe have a conversation with the Regional Planning Commission and our city attorney about what its effect would be. I just don't want to prematurely, while we're in the early stages of a major interchange review, sort of cut off solutions.
Mm-hmm. And that needs a solution, boy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I guess we can move to the next one, which is the Mayfair Park area. And recommendations. So this was one of the spots where the city has been looking at doing some stormwater improvements, kind of right at the edge of this area. So staff just wanted to kind of point that out to make sure that those plans could still go forward. That was the only thing here.
I mean, when doing that, can we ensure that whenever possible there is still, you know, canopy coverage for connectivity? You know, to make it clear that yes, obviously the stormwater, public stormwater is critical, but manage it to try to maintain as much canopy as possible.
Or to
I think we can,
maybe
I think
not.
we can accomplish that, Monica. I think we can put some language in there. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, especially when we start talking about city-owned parcels, our opportunities to address water quality in Lake Champlain are limited, and we want to, you know, this is one of those competing interest things, and it would be a shame if we weren't able to improve water quality in areas where there's, you know, runoff going from a major place like Kennedy Drive.
Yeah.
Okay. And maybe that language could also not have chain link fences. I know that that's something that we've talked about in the Southeast Quadrant with habitat connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
So I am not weighing in on this one. I actually live in this neighborhood, so the majority of this area is owned by my condo association.
You know what, Jessica, I'm really sorry. I meant to bring something else up on that last bit by the high school, and this is not really on this map, so I don't know when this comes up, but we talked a long time ago about the use of Animal Crossing signs. And I mean, Kennedy Drive goes right through such an important, you know, natural area, and the number of residents who have seen the family of ducklings walking across Kennedy Drive, and I know it's not really part of this particular conversation, but if there was an opportunity to, on Kennedy, add some of those, you know, crossing signs, I just think it would be a big help to the community to have that there. So, side note.
Yeah, no, that is great. Thank you, Monica. Okay, so Valley Ridge Road area, staff's recommendation, you can see there's a lot of steep areas, so just retain the forest block. And what might have gotten lost is here there's a proposed connection or cord or connector along the Velco right away. Any comment?
And this is Centennial Woods. Is this developable? Or,
So this is Centennial Woods over here, but we were more specifically talking about this piece that's on the other side of Patchen Road.
yeah, I'm just thinking of the corridors aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, so Ted, we can, the next one is going to be Centennial Woods, but the corridor is to connect Centennial Woods down to the Winooski River. There is a Velco right-of-way that is right up against the Burlington line that is sort of a connector in that it's the only thing that's in there is power lines, but it's not treed because there's power lines. This seems pretty straightforward from the staff perspective because A, it's association land, B, it's all 25% slopes or huge floodplains. So I don't think, either way, I don't think anything really would happen in this area. So that's why the recommendation is to keep it as it's mapped.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
Sounds good.
Okay, so, you know, zooming out, so this is the one we were just talking about at the north. So then this is the Centennial Woods, and you can see this big portion of it is in Burlington. This is our city line here. And a central piece is conserved. So turning on to look at where the slopes are, there's quite a few ravines and steep slopes through this area.
Were some of those 15% or are those all greater than 20?
15 to 25 is the light blue, 25 plus is the dark blue.
Mhm.
Hey,
So,
Paul?
but do you have a sense of which are 15 versus 20 within that?
I have access to that. I group them together, but I can certainly get that if anybody's interested.
Like when you're, like I jog and walk in here a lot, and it's really steep areas.
It is steep.
Yeah. So recommendation was no changes to the mapping.
Right. The reason I bring it up is because we haven't discussed yet what percent of a slope we would consider for hazard. And there is a lot of 15% slope, like less than 20% slope.
Yep.
In general around the city. So if we are including 15% here, hopefully 15% is not a lot of what we're seeing here is what I'm hoping. Because if we did include 15% in our hazards, that's a lot of
Right.
a lot
Right
of
now,
land.
Monica, the draft is that only 25% is the hazard,
The dark blue.
dark blue.
Okay, on the mapping tool, it has all of them listed. That's why I kept
Yeah.
thinking that.
Yeah.
So the point is that we haven't decided what the cutoff is yet. So I just was looking in here to see if maybe that was mostly 20% and then the 15 was minimal, so that we could be consistent throughout the city, that maybe the 15 to 20 is less significant than the 20 plus. And maybe 20 plus even becomes hazard, I don't know.
Right. So the draft currently in the text would be that 25 plus is considered a hazard, infrastructure only, and only in rare circumstances, and 15 to 25 is considered a steep slope, a level 2 resource where there needs to be caution and applied to how it's done. So functionally, just if I can, I'll just take a quick second to sort of, this is a good property to speak about how all this would work together. So next to Patchen Road is the old dog park there. Currently that's zoned institutional agricultural, but let's say just for discussion's sake, if that was a residentially zoned piece of land, the way that this would all work is that the property owner could apply to be a conservation PUD potentially. In that case, they'd be able to use as much of their property as they want to as their starting point for the entire conservation PUD. They would then have to conserve at least 70% of the total land, including any hazards. So that would be the dark blue and the wetlands and things like that. If they had leftover, then they could consider building in the forest block that was not, they could consider building in the 15% slopes, and if they're not at their 30%, they could apply to build in the forest block areas that are not hazards. So that's how this would work in this instance. Does that make sense?
Paul, are you talking about the property, not Centennial Woods, but the ones on the one on the other side of 89?
Yeah, the one where Monica, where Jessica is moving her mouse around, the old dog park area. North of Centennial Woods. So the property that is Centennial Woods, but not the conserved area.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I guess what we haven't looked at yet, and I don't know when we do that, is like, do we agree that the 25% is the hazard, or is the hazard 20% and up, and then below 20% is this lesser? Or is there a reason that 25 is a hazard? Is it a bigger state-based issue?
In speaking with our consultant, different municipalities do it differently. 25 is widely considered to be, a hazardous circumstance. So from a legal perspective, that's very strong footing. 20%, some communities do, some communities don't. I think, looking around the map, this was a staff recommendation, just looking at where there might be places where there's a 20% slope, but it's not, or 21% slope where it's not functionally prohibiting development, and that by putting it into a hazard, it might cut off access to developable areas nearby.
I'm actually considering the opposite, which is it necessary to protect anything below 20%? If it has no other, if it has no other hazard, resources connected to it. I guess that,
we
so
can certainly show you all of that whenever you like. I grouped them together for the purpose of this presentation, but we can, if commissioners would like, it's not a huge exercise to just show that in 3 different colors for you.
So maybe that's for another agenda, but we haven't made those decisions or those recommendations yet. We haven't had that conversation yet. So I just wanted to put that out there.
It is true. The last time we talked about the slopes, we did talk about maybe having the lower slope just have some guidelines on erosion control. And
exactly. Yeah.
Right, which is where the 15 to 25 is now. Okay.
Okay. So
quick question. So the parcel to the right of 89 is we're looking at, that's in form-based code, so that's not beholden to the habitat block standards.
Can you?
It's a portion. Can I zoom in maybe?
I think I drew the form-based code in there. At least I tried
to.
I might have missed putting that layer on. The form-based code basically goes behind the yellow line.
Like here?
Yeah.
Okay, so that whole, it's not that whole parcel, it's just part of that.
So everything south of the yellow line is in the form-based code area.
Okay.
So it's a tricky property to access, but in theory, somebody could.
Yeah, this.
Okay, so it's part of the parcel, not the whole parcel.
Right, and then the rest of it is currently in your R4 district. I had looked at the possibility of carving out an exception to the forest block right along Patchen Road because the property goes all the way up there. But Jessica, if you zoom into Patchen Road, it is all 25% slopes in there. There's no reasonable way to get to that property from there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple of tiny little spots that if somebody accessed through another property, but we're talking about a third of an acre or something like that in size.
Okay.
So we have, so this is a good point. So Sandy Dooley mentioned in the chat box that years ago, UVM had come to us talking about doing some development in the dog park area as part of their master plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think they have approached the Planning Commission also about it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So
is that currently industrial? I mean, educational ag? No.
Yes,
it
is currently
is.
educational ag. It's educational ag north, which is slightly different than the other one, but it's that's the current zoning for it.
Hey, Paul, while we're on that subject, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
UVM, obviously, we're going to be talking about another couple of their parcels very soon, but I can't remember if we've had this discussion or not. Has the city had a discussion with them about what their intentions are for their properties in the long term? I don't know if they don't want to let us know or if they're.
We have been in fairly regular communication with them. I've met with them twice in the last 5 months or so, and they are, we've been discussing what their interests are. We've been sharing what the city's, where the zoning might be going, and have encouraged them to share with us, what are their various priorities. They do have a master plan that's about 10 or 12 years old at this point that identifies the objectives for many properties, but there are also several that are that are listed as undesignated, and we've encouraged having an ongoing dialogue with them. Not to put her on the spot, but Lisa Kingsbury, if you wanted to add anything, please feel free.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Do you want me to? Hi, I'm Lisa Kingsbury. I'm the Associate Director of Planning at UVM. And yes, we've been following this pretty closely. Paul and I and others at UVM have had discussions. We have talked about coming to the Planning Commission at some point with a larger conversation around all of our land in South Burlington. We do have a campus master plan. It does have areas that we've identified for potential development in the future. That dog park is one of the areas that is identified as potential future development. We are actually just about to embark on probably about a year-long process to update that campus master plan. We're just getting started in that, and we would certainly be happy to keep the city involved in that process as we go forward. Paul, I don't know if you got Austin Hart's call today. I know I did watch your work session from, I think it was September 29th, and you guys talked a little bit about maybe leaving the IA properties out of this discussion for a little while until we were able to have that conversation. I don't know if that's still on the table. That was what Austin tried to reach out today, but we would be happy to come and have those conversations before you make decisions on these few properties of ours, if that's something the Planning Commission would entertain.
Yeah, I think what we had mentioned at the last meeting was how it might apply. I don't think we were going to just not do the forested habitat areas, but we understand that it's not a traditional type of underlying zoning, so they're like how it applies would probably be more unique to you. So yeah, I think that was the general idea. So I think that is something we'll have to kind of figure out. Is that correct, Paul? Maybe I didn't say that right.
Yeah, no, I think that that's accurate. And Lisa, what I think I had said was that staff was recommending that we not do PUD types specific to a university campus at this point. I have one unheard message on my voicemail, so I probably missed Austin's call. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Continue our dialogue and follow up with you as we go forward.
Yeah.
But the commission did ask me to look into how educational institutions under state law are, how it relates to this work. So that's, I put that question to our legal folks and happy to follow up with you, Lisa, on that as well as on the commission.
That sounds good. Maybe we can connect in the next week.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you.
Okay, so Red Rocks and Lake area. So this red piece here is shown on the official map as an open space area. We have a few recommendations here. One was that, this upper recommendation was the idea that for an area that has the city adopted natural areas management plan, it might be regulated under that versus the forest block regulations. It seems like a reasonable plan.
Comment on that.
Go ahead.
I was participating in the South Burlington Master Naturalist program when I believe some of those maintenance programs were being created, and there were some pretty severe comments about differences of opinion in forest management, shall we say. So I don't know that I would just leave that to, I think that our this mapping and our suggestions can help ensure the parks management plan is paying attention to those precious elements. So I would actually do the reverse and include it and then ask the city management plan to take into consideration what we map here, if that makes sense.
So keep the habitat block in Red Rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my comment was more generally to all of them. Red Rocks was an example. I guess, you know, I guess my question is sort of this. This, outside of our stream buffers, regulating forested areas is really sort of the first area where the city would be sort of regulating non-development, the management of forested areas. And what really drew my sort of attention and thought were, say at Wheeler, where it used to be largely a farm area, and portions of it have become reforested and portions of it have been identified as ground nesting bird habitat, and the recommendations in there are that it be maintained as such. How do we, and that's just an example, but how do we balance certain recommendations with what's expected from a zoning perspective? Or, you know, in the Red Rocks example, if a management plan were to say, you know, the picnic area is getting dramatically underused because it's so shaded, should that be opened up to be a more useful public park?
And can I offer this example, because this is what came up in the Red Rocks specifically, and maybe this is something we can apply to all core forest everywhere. It's actually critical to the core forest if a tree needs to be taken down, if it's struck by lightning, if there's a serious health or safety issue. If it is, ideally it should just be dropped and left. But if it is shredded, then it's important, very important, that the wood chips remain on the property. And there was a management plan that did a cleanup in Red Rocks, and then they were removing, the plan was to remove all of the wood chips, and that's like the reverse of what you should do for a healthy forest. So that's actually a good policy for all core forests everywhere in terms of proper health. I don't know where that fits in.
Okay, anybody else feel strongly one way or the other?
Keep it.
Keep it as a first
Yeah.
one? Okay, sounds good. Then the southern piece, we had a little tongue that stuck out here to be removed. And language about the PUDs kind of incorporating this open space, is that?
I was curious about why that would or should be removed, because it does have connection outside of some driveways. It does have connection to the natural area below it. Is there, what would be the reason to remove that piece?
That's a good question, Monica. I think that as looking around this property, recognizing that this is a you know, a very valuable property in all senses of the word, the city's official map already designates a pretty significant amount of that property that's not supposed to be built on. And I guess my concern was that if that is not built on, and then the forest block, that we might be starting to get somewhere close to a takings on this property. And so I was looking for what's the least valuable portion of the property to return to possible development. And it also, you know, you asked me, or Bernie, I guess, asked at the last meeting to try to identify, you know, where are there areas where it's marginal. And looking at this aerial, it's sort of it's sort of interesting that there's a lot of trees immediately south of it, but it's not considered to be a forest habitat block. So it seemed, you know, why is the line where it is? It seemed less set in stone than some of the other ones. And everything in there was in the light green. So that was my thinking. My final note in there is I don't think this can be part of this immediate project, but revisiting the official map and what you want to do all along the lake shore is probably a good idea for in the next year to be doing.
Paul, quick question. You mentioned the PUD just mirroring the official map if something happened there. That has to do with that space in red not being developed and kept as open space in a park?
Yeah, so currently the zoning in that area says that it's 1 unit per, the official map shows a park there. And so any development is intended to, must accommodate that, or the city has a right of first refusal to buy it. The zoning also says that if a property in that zone, which happens to be this property, accommodates the official map, then the zoning goes from 1 unit an acre up to 7 units an acre. So that was what the city had done to sort of incentivize a developer to, if ever this property is developed, to want to preserve that piece of land and not to force the hand of the city through the right of first refusal. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's a little bit quirky, and it's probably an area that needs a little more homework, aside from the subject of habitat blocks.
And how much acreage are we talking about that could be 7 units per acre?
The property is about 100 acres in size.
Okay. And could also be TDRs be used potentially there? Is that the strategy?
That's for discussion for you all, as to how you want to do that. Do you want to make this a conservation PUD area? You know, we can revisit that in a couple weeks' time when we look in more detail at that map of PUD applicability.
Okay, I'm going to move south along the lake shore. Paul pointed out this land swap space here with the idea that this would have been a roadway connection in. The road does not connect through over here. You know, you can see, you come across the tracks here and up, or here and down, but there's actually no connection between these locations, right? That was the idea with this land swap, Paul.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think this is really up to us what to do. I mean, I guess I would be inclined to leave the habitat block and come back if needed in the future.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is an area where there's so much connectivity. I wish I understood the path. There's so much connectivity going north-south along the water. I wonder how much connectivity there really is going across Shelburne Road. That, I mean, this would be the portion along Shelburne Road is something that I personally would, the yellow, I'm sorry, is wetland.
It's hazards. This is
That's not Shelburne Road, Monica.
this is the railroad track.
Oh, I was wondering. Okay.
No, it's so funny.
Figure out where that was on Shelburne Road. Okay, never mind.
This is the railroad track, which actually probably does have wildlife corridor along it. I know it won't show up that way, but they often do work as habitat corridors as well. So
was the recommendation just to leave this as is?
You know, I think it's really up to us. I mean, I kind of feel like maybe leave it might be better. It sounded like Bernie weighed in that way. I'm seeing some nods.
Yeah. One quick question, Paul. Why is this neighborhood not connected? You know, north-south?
Short version is quirk of history. Longer version is nobody on, at least in the few conversations that I've had with folks down there, no, people on neither side of it have ever advocated. And I believe that at least one of them, at least the northern one, is a private road.
Holmes? I think this one's Holmes.
Yeah, I believe so. Certainly long-term, I think that in our bike ped mapping, we've explored that it would be really neat if there's nothing else, that there could be a bicycle connection long-term, connecting those two, and then north, and in a dream world, crossing the Potash Brook and getting over to Central Avenue in Queen City Park, and then up to the whole Burlington bike path.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry.
Yeah, the main thing I wanted to flag for you here was that about 13 years ago, the city did do a land swap to allow for a future roadway. And so at some future time, it might be a good idea for you all to sort of dig into that history and see whether that's something that you want to advance or not advance. But I don't have a problem with either decision for it. You can always modify zoning in the future.
Is that big parcel in the middle, is there no way to access that parcel? Is that the big parcel? Yeah. That has no access to any road?
I think that might be the case right now, but it's ownership. Well, I guess its access might be through that roadway, that land swap that I just showed you.
Okay.
So I think that's how it would theoretically be accessed. I'd have to look at ownership to see if it's the same ownership or different ownership from the folks to the north.
Yeah, I vaguely remembered that these two were owned by each other, but maybe that's not true. I don't really know that, but okay. Well, it sounds like no change to the habitat block at this point, is what I'm hearing. Okay, so Bartlett Brook.
I'm sorry, did you mean, when you say no change to habitat block, you mean we're going to keep that habitat block? Because that's not marked as a habitat block anywhere right now. So we're saying we agree with listing that as a...
It is a habitat block, this green and the green.
No, I know, but it is not currently protected under Article 12.
Oh, I guess when I said no change, you know how on some of the previous slides, there was like a chunk that was identified to be changed one way or the other from the Arrowwood mapping? I guess I just go with the Arrowwood mapping.
So we'll go with Arrowwood, good. Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Not clear. Okay, so Bartlett Brook, a few pieces here, as well as these kind of lighter green habitat connectors to connect across to some of these other areas. Then, turning on some of the hazards, you can see quite a few river areas and steep slopes. There was one recommended change, which was right here. This is a otherwise developable little kind of jut out that is in the transit overlay district. Seemed reasonable. Okay, any other comments? Okay. Alan,
sorry, I had a hard time seeing that one, Jessica. I didn't know what it was pointing to. I meant to ask about that. What?
Yeah, can you zoom in on that, Jessica?
Yes. See this blue area? That's what I was talking about. This piece.
Oh, I see. I see. So you're saying remove that piece from the habitat block?
Yeah, it's at the top of the slope. It's currently, looks maybe less forested. And it's in the transit overlay district.
And we'd have our buffer on the hazards. So there's
right. So all of your slope standards and setbacks from streams would still apply. This is just, sort of equivalent to how you wanted to remove areas in the form-based code. This is surrounded by development. It's a imminently developable little piece of land that seemed like a place where the trade-offs would make sense to remove that from a habitat block without diminishing the value of the forest overall.
Okay.
Okay. So Allen Road, moving further south. Did that? Yeah. Okay. So recommendation, retain habitat block as mapped, as well as adding these connection pieces. Any questions about this one? Okay. Eastwood Swift Street area. So we had quite a few notes in here, generally broken into the north of Swift, which has the UVM lands, as well as some residential pieces. The Wheelock and Farrell Park areas south of Swift Street. Paul included this helpful aerial photograph from 1962 in here.
Mhm.
I don't know if people were able to kind of get this lined up in their heads. And then if I scroll down once more, we have some recommendations here.
Mhm.
So said staff is leaning towards option 2, which is, for some of these parcels that have like a large amount of the habitat block on them, making sure that one of the tools that we're working on is able to apply. So, the conservation PUD or a different tool.
Yeah, our thinking was essentially that this is what the conservation PUD is intended to do. If a property is substantially covered in a forested area or areas of priority importance to the city, to conserve the vast majority of it and then give a clear direction to the DRB about how to evaluate those areas that would be allowed to be built upon in order to have it not be a takings. And then this is where the city council could discuss, if they ever wanted to, non-regulatory tools of working with property owners if they felt that they wanted to go past where zoning can go.
Mhm.
So the purpose of the conservation PUD would be to retain the value of land of what could happen in a standard subdivision, so as to not get into illegal takings. And that would conserve a significant portion of some of these properties. And then anything beyond that would be the responsibility to figure out with non-regulatory tools of acquisition or agreements or who knows what.
So 2 questions, and this actually relates to the Allen Road as well. With the conservation PUDs, and I know there's the underlying districts, but I still go back to, with a conservation PUD, allowing higher density, perhaps maybe even than the underlying zoning, but only in that buildable area. So for that, which would get us into some zoning changes, perhaps, like on Allen Road. I meant to ask about that when we were there. The areas that are safe to build on, can those allow higher density? And I guess I would basically ask the same here in those conservation PUDs, given how close they are to Shelburne Road. And I mean, I know it's not right on Shelburne Road. But the second part of that is the Edland is still appearing here as a forest block, but in terms of the PUD type, again, is the Edland what is the institutional ag?
Yes.
Okay. So anything that, when we get to the PUD type, is where we will separate that conversation, have the conversation, but as of right now, we will not be permitting PUD type on industrial, educational ag, right?
Well, you may still decide to permit a conservation PUD in order to achieve the conservation. Then you would need to figure out, or we would need to figure out, how to apply the uses and the density in the developable area, because an institutional agricultural isn't about residential, it's about campus type things. So a conservation PUD could still conceivably apply and allow campus activities in the developable areas. So that's sort of our initial thinking on that, but we've still got to do a little bit of homework on that subject to align things.
I would agree with Monica that dense trading off for more conserved areas certainly makes a lot of sense in that area. Something to be interesting to explore.
We had discussed the possibility that maybe giving people incentives to conserve even more than 70%. You could potentially say that if they conserve more, then they get more density. We had talked about it the other way, that if you conserve more, maybe you can do some large lots as well. So they could both be options.
Yeah, I like that.
Question for you. So
yeah,
in particular, the Edlin property, which we know obviously UVM is looking at possibly selling or has talked about it. That gets sold. The developer comes in and says, we leave it as a forest block like it is. They come in and say, what can we do here? Is that where the conservation PUD is then enacted or could be enacted, or is it?
Well, there's a couple layers here. So first of all, just a reminder that the underlying zoning on the Edlin property is institutional agricultural.
Yeah.
You do have a zoning change request that was given to you right before interim zoning was adopted to change that to residential. But currently, what can take place on that property are things related to a university. That could include dorms, it could include campus buildings, but it can't be housing per se that isn't university related. So that's one question. And the second part that you were asking is, if somebody bought it and wanted to build one of the things that they are allowed to build on there, let's say a university, a school related use, then yes, they could. The idea would be that it could be done as a conservation PUD. It would just be a conservation PUD with campus elements to it instead of homes. And therefore they would conserve the majority of the property. As I said, we still need to work through some of this stuff. State law is a little different for educational facilities than it is for others. And the idea of being able to transfer the density from the forest areas to the non-forest areas sort of doesn't really apply in a campus. So we need to work through some of that stuff, but that was broadly the idea.
So what do we do as like a holding pattern if we want to identify that that's an important habitat block, but we don't have a way of attaching that second piece yet to those kind of parcels? Can we still map it as this habitat block as it's listed here, and then
I think that if that's where the commission wants to go, I would recommend that that's what you do, and then figure out how to allow for limited activity within those areas
at a later time, or right at the same time?
Probably as part of this when we finish off conservation PUDs.
Okay.
Because we neither want to nor can leave a property with no path to making economic use of the property.
But we have a zoning request to address on that property when we're done with IZ.
Probably commensurate with it, because it's directly related to what you're working on.
Okay.
Paul, do you know if there has been, this is kind of unrelated but related, has there been any discussion with the city council about open space, highest priorities, and the city purchasing those properties? Like, is that being discussed at all?
The council is, I think, waiting to hear from the commission what the regulatory environment is going to look like. They, at least we had a meeting with Jessica and Bernie and Helen and Megan that they felt at least that would be really useful and important for the council to figure out what they want to do from the non-regulatory side by knowing where the commission is with the regulatory side.
And can I also just make sure I understand, looking at the Edlin portion, given what Duncan just asked, if we were to map that as this habitat block, what we still don't know is if our policy-driven statement of that being a habitat block, if it prevents the university from doing a institutional ag type development. Like, do they have to follow our policy decision?
That is something that we are doing the legal research on.
Right.
Because state law has certain limitations on local zoning for certain types of uses, including education, as to what subject areas cities can and cannot regulate.
So as a short term, if we find out that legally institutional ag can make some different decisions about how they use the land, no matter what our local policy is, it wouldn't really be considered a takings if we just basically accept this habitat block as is and not apply any other options to it, because the institutional ag would have its own way to, if you learn from legal that the institutional ag zone rights can supersede our policy decision on this being a habitat block, then it's not a takings. So why can't we just list it as a habitat block for now without options until we then have the further conversations about what their master plan is or whatever? I'm putting it out there.
I think putting on my big sticker that says not an attorney, I think that's probably accurate, but not an attorney.
So that would be a simple solution if UVM still had the flexibility to do what they could do within their current zoning, and they weren't limited, but we could map it as being identified as a critical habitat block.
Well, I also wonder if there is, like, and I think this is what number 2 actually is, like for a non-residential parcel where we are asking somebody to do a conservation PUD, would that basically just be development could happen over 30% of the parcel according to whatever type of development was allowed there in the underlying zoning? Like, could there be kind of a simplified?
Basically, that's the intent. Yes, Jessica.
Yeah. Okay. So it's still the same.
They're classically applied to residential, but I feel like we can make it work for a non-residential also.
It seems like there could be potentially other locations where we might need something like that too.
There's a handful. There's not too many. That's part of this exercise, but there are a handful.
Okay.
But that Edland property is even tricky with that kind of option, because so much of it is core and hazard. That would they even have the ability under that kind of normal PUD to find 30% there? That's not.
So yes, the way that would work, Monica, is that with some level of discretion to the DRB, they would be able to get 30% as long as there's 30% that aren't hazards. The priority would be to conserve as much of the core as possible. But if the core was 93% of the property, then some core would be able to be removed.
Okay.
Isn't the university selling the Edlin and then I forget what other slice in there? Or weren't they being sort of?
Yes, I
put
believe
together?
that the middle one
Right.
below Edland, and then the one to the that's sort of a C shape to the right of that, and possibly that other one. But those are in a different zoning district. Those are in a residential zoning district already.
Mm-hmm. And
They're in the R1.
if the same owner owned both of those, he could not create a master plan.
They could do a master plan, and they would be strongly encouraged to do one that involved as much land as they chose to, prioritizing areas that are outside of the forest block. So it would prioritize for development the portion right up against Swiss Street.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This was identified as what, the number 2 forest block on Arrowwood? Am I correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yep.
Number 1 was the Great Swamp. I think this was number 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, if this is a parcel that is critical in that component, I mean, obviously, I don't, I'm not sure the city's in a financial position to look at buying it, but that's, I guess that's what the open space fund would be for, is something like that. I mean, if that is that critical of habitat block.
Right, and that's where the marriage of this of the regulations and what the regulatory environment can do versus the non-regulatory tools. The regulations need to retain economic value to a property owner. You have the ability through zoning, as you have for years, to adjust it, but it does need to retain the economic value. A group like the city council, or working in collaboration with the university in this case, could come up with non-regulatory ways to conserve a piece of land if that was a priority.
I mean, this one really seems tricky because it seems like we would be forced to apply some regulation that we don't necessarily, you know, if the city came back and said, absolutely no way, we're never going to be able to purchase this or do any kind of protections that would be not a takings or whatever. So therefore, Planning Commission, you must do something. Then we would have to have that discussion and figure that out. But for us to, in this particular case, apply something to it without just saying we acknowledge that it's a core habitat block, and then to just undo it, it would be, is it leading the city council differently than if we, if we weren't?
I think we need to have the conservation PUD as one of our tools for other locations as well. It's not only this specific spot. I know it was important to apply here. So I think if we go with this conservation PUD option for all the parcels that have the same kind of high coverage, it is an approach that works kind of across multiple locations.
And that would be even if it's not residential.
And, it sounds like we need a non-residential kind of version of that because, this is likely not the only spot.
Can we, under the conservation PUD, I mean, we talk about building types. Could we just broaden the building types to allow for non-residential under certain circumstances?
Yeah, so the idea of most of the PUD types, including conservation, is that there's building types and there's uses. That the uses would be basically those that are allowed in the underlying zoning district. There are the building types would apply in the residential. There's some limited building types that we're looking at non-residential, but in the case of a campus, we probably wouldn't get into that. But the uses would be the ones that are underlying. So if a particular residential district allows for a small grocery store already in the underlying zoning district, then that would carry through into the PUD or a bed and breakfast or something like that.
So then for conservation, for this specific conservation PUD, having a use, if the underlying zoning remained such that it was campus, then the underlying zoning usage would allow for example, a dorm being put onto the conservation PUD, and that would all fit together.
Right. So that way you're retaining the existing rights on the property. You're just rearranging it. What's a little bit tricky, as I said, is that on the residential side, you can draw a very clear math of saying you could have built 30 homes. Now you can still build 30 homes and it's a smaller area. We need to work out something on the how to apply that for non-residential with things like lot coverage and things like that, that maybe you move all the lot coverage over into this area so you could be, 80% lot coverage in a small portion of the property in return for having conserved the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. And we need to find out if legally the institutional ag would even have to follow that, right? Because we're still not sure.
Yep.
So maybe this is is there a way to get clarification from legal on that before we spend more time creating a...
I put the question in, so I'll try to follow up with them shortly. I asked them last week, but we've posed a lot of questions to them.
One more question for you, Paul. Looping back, so where does the zoning change request fit in here? Because the zoning request is to change this to residential, yes?
Yeah. So where this fits in is as you're deciding which PUD types to apply, you may decide that if you don't want to change the zoning, then you would not apply a TND as being allowed here. If you did decide to change the zoning and make it something residential, then you would probably also then apply a TND type to it, or maybe you would just say that it stays a conservation PUD.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, because there are a lot of once we open the let's change the zoning here, there are definitely other parts of the map and individual landowners that would be standing in line to get their requests in for that as well, which I do think is appropriate. I just don't know if that's what we're doing during this inclusionary to change the zoning. But I do think that it's absolutely fair once we set in stone through the approval process, the revised Article 12, that we do give all landowners affected an opportunity to discuss with us zoning changes. It seems like a very appropriate time.
You're certainly welcome to do that. And the design of this would be that properties can have their underlying zoning changed without having to upend the entire work, sort of similar to, and Paul will remember this with the form-based code. They were designed so that if over time it makes sense to change a T4 to a T5, you don't have to go through a 6-year study to do it. You just do it. So yeah, I think I'm going to backtrack on what I said a minute ago and say likely it would stay a conservation PUD. The question is what's allowed in that conservation PUD? What's the underlying zoning? So you don't have to tackle that as part of this. You could follow up with that after.
Okay, well, that was a good discussion. So I'm going to move to the next one unless somebody has anything else. I don't think I switched. Did I miss one? Wait a minute.
Nope, that's it. You're on.
Yeah. This just didn't line up right. Okay. So Meadowwood area. Recommendation here was to retain forest blocks as drawn, as well as adding this connector up to these areas up here. You can kind of see what that looks like. Any discussion? Okay. Moving to the Wheeler Nature Park and the Hill Farm area. And the recommendations. There were a few things here. Some of this came out of the discussion we had last meeting about are there actual trees under there or not? And about the fingers. So here, it seems like along the interstate, there was this finger leading to nothing, and it is right next to the interstate. And then, there's this jutting out area. And when you look at the if I zoom a little bit, you can kind of see that there's no trees under there. So, when you actually look at the aerial and kind of follow that a little bit better, this seemed to make sense. To just kind of realign with the underlying vegetation a little better. And then, over in the nature park area, there's a piece that was right in the homestead area, that the city was planning for more active uses. So these seem to make sense to me. Any questions or comments or? Okay, I'm going to go down to Meadowland. Here staff's recommending kind of following this edge of the habitat block and removing this piece. Thoughts?
What is the solar farm zone for, Paul?
It is Southeast Quadrant Neighborhood Residential. So that's part of the Southeast Quadrant there. So in a future, at some point, it could be residential. Not likely for a couple of decades, but it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that staff recommended that this piece be removed is sort of similar to the hill farms. Jessica, if you zoom in, you can see that there's really, the vegetation there is really kind of, it's not really a forested area.
Yeah.
It's
Bernie's buckthorn.
Yeah. Whereas the little finger up and to the right of it, we did suggest be kept because that's a nice buffer to the quarry immediately east of that. And I suspect that it's part of an Act 250 requirement anyway, that they would have to retain that buffer.
How do you even access this area that you're suggesting we remove from the habitat?
Meadowland Drive goes right there.
Do you see this road here, Monica?
Oh, right there. Okay, got it. Yes, I see.
The quarry is accessed off South Brownell, though, which is the confusing part. It comes from Williston.
Yeah, okay.
So if I zoom out, so this is South Brownell, and that's the quarry access.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're going to the solar farm, you actually get there off of Du Bois.
Right.
Du Bois over here. So. Okay, so okay, as is here,
as recommended, yep.
Recommended. Okay, cheese factory area, Dorset Street. So staff recommends figuring out, so I guess it's this here, this piece here at Sadie Lane, and piece here at Wedgwood. Both are outside the NRP, which remember is this kind of brighter green line. And these are both in the transition district.
Yeah, where did that term come from?
So back in 2006, when the zoning was put in, this little area at the south end of Dorset Street was made into its own zoning district in the Southeast Quadrant, and it can be either a sending area or a receiving area. And so people can either conserve the land or build on the land, which has been a little bit confusing to folks over the years. What I wrote in my notes here was that you may want to, and I'm not necessarily saying it's right now, but you may want to look at the 10 or so parcels that are in this district and just decide one way or the other whether they're NRP or neighborhood residential, because of the 10, about 7 of them are already, their fate is sealed. They're either conserved or they're neighborhoods, and so they don't really need to live in this in-between zoning district long term.
I apologize. I hadn't seen that term before. I didn't know where it came from.
Yeah. So really, there's just two little fingers here, one just off Sadie Lane and one off Wedgwood.
I had a hard time understanding what you're calling out on this one as well. I'm sorry. Can
Do
you?
you want to zoom in on those, Jessica?
Oh yeah, here, hold on. So it's, sorry, I'm moving too quickly. So here's Sadie Lane, and it's this piece here, which, you know, if I zoom out a little bit, you can kind of see it's not quite forested. It's more of a unmowed area, looks like. So here's the NRP zone. So this is the finger or the block.
Yeah,
gutting piece.
part of why I don't have a strong recommendation on this one is that I think we have some wetland mapping in this area that's been recently done. I suspect that there is a wetland tongue that kind of works its way off the yellow on the left up to the yellow on the right.
Mm-hmm.
And if that was the case, then that will likely be sort of dictating where development can and cannot take place. And there may be one or two house sites in the very top left corner of the forest block that could be built on this property. But otherwise, it would be really not buildable anyway.
So is
So-
keeping the core intact at least, because that would most likely be going along with the wetland, and then just maybe permitting the 100 meter in this case to be removed. So keep the dark green, but allow for the buffer to be.
Or I wonder if this is a spot where it would, you know, just going with what you're saying, Monica, it would be a connector. So there'd be a little more
Right.
flexibility on where it is, but the width would be maintained.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the easiest and most consistent way of doing it.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so a connector between the orange pieces here. And then the other piece was down here. Excuse me, zooming around. And, you know, here again, you know, the NRP is this line here. And then we have these hazards coming up.
Yeah, and in this case, you can see there's really not much of a forested area outside of the NRP. It's pretty light vegetation in there.
Yeah, but it might not be forested, but there is surely a lot of, with so many connections happening, I'm sure that there's a lot of habitat happening in there.
Yeah, it's quite a connection from north to south. All the
Yeah,
way
it's
to
a
Sadie Lane.
connection. Mm-hmm.
Is it, Paul, you mentioned a road. Is that road supposed to, is that just dead end there?
It is built to the property line because the requirements and the regulations are that if you're building a road, you must build it to the property line. And with the current zoning being that it allows for development, then the road was stubbed so that it could connect. You know, that doesn't have to dictate the future, but that is what it is. That's how it was built.
I would say keep it as it is.
Yeah, keep it. I agree. Keep it as it is, and see if during the public hearing something, you know, comes up. I agree with Ted.
I think that might be the last one.
Yeah,
Oh dear.
I think so. Oh no, what are we gonna do? And it's exactly 9 o'clock. Look at that.
Woohoo!
So amazing.
I did have a request for a future time though, because we've a couple times through these maps we've talked about potential zoning changes or NRP shifting here and should it retract somewhere else. And I just want to ask the Planning Commission to, if everyone would be willing to commit to when we, after interim zoning is done, can we make a priority of our work list a time to, once Article 12 is solid, to officially, you know, welcome landowners' feedback on how, on any kind of requests they may have for their land, given the changes, so that we're not, addressing any zoning changes necessarily now, but that we're committing to, after this is done, making that a priority in our workload.
I think we have to be a little careful because that could open up quite an extensive amount of meetings. If we suddenly have 30 or 40 landowners and we have to address every single one of them. I'm worried with our work schedule, we suddenly do that, and then we're still have a lot of stuff on our plate that we really haven't even addressed. So I understand what you're saying, but I'm a little concerned that it might open.
Yeah.
Wouldn't their concerns come out during the public hearing process? I mean, if they're tuned in and aware.
Yeah, it could. Yeah.
No, but then they might bring up a zoning change, but is now the time to address that? I mean, either we need to address them or we shouldn't. And I do believe that there is a precedent set for this, and that when another significant change like this took place, I'm not sure if it was the original NRP, but there was, about a year after a significant change was made, there were some landowner requests that were considered. And I think it would just be coming up with the best way to do that. It could include the UVM stuff, it could include other, I don't know what the best process would be.
Monica, we've made a practice of doing kind of exactly what you're saying. Like when we first implemented the form-based code district, over that first year, there were quite a few like little things that came up and landowners came forward, and we actually wound up having a subcommittee to like really focus on those to make sure we were addressing them, because we knew it had been such a big change. So I don't think we're gonna just ignore people. We've been putting people off with new requests for a while here, but we are gonna have to get back to those.
So are you suggesting that we could commit to perhaps being prepared to assign a subcommittee, or have some kind of process to hear people and then therefore not take on zoning request changes now?
Well, I think that's what we're doing. We're currently not taking them on, but we've been telling people when we're done with this, we're gonna get to those eventually, next.
Okay.
So, but I don't know that we need to advertise that,
I understand. No, but I mean, we did talk about the Hill Farm property specifically. That came up in a meeting. So
they'll be there.
I know. I do think that this is a significant change, and it frees us away from discussing the zoning changes to really be clear and specific about Article 12, especially if they know that we're going to be ready to listen later. So,
Monica, I think, Jessica, you mentioned that's kind of what we did with the form-based code subcommittee. I know Ted was on it too. We kind of went back and heard, okay, now that we've done it, what are the issues? How can we work on them? I think if it reaches that level, we could probably do a subcommittee for that if needed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like we don't want to wind up with new regulations that create a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we were done with the forest habitat block discussion. So we do have some other business on here. There's some items from Burlington and Williston, just information if you want to zoom, or yeah, they are both Zoom. If you want to zoom into those, or if you had questions or things you want to bring up to us.
Paul, I would just ask, usually on these, is there anything in particular in those that may be of interest to us in the work that we're doing?
Yeah, the Burlington one, they are, one of the things that they're doing is they're codifying some of the temporary things that we're probably going to see in the continuing in the future, like the ability to do tents in their business areas. And it's on our work plan over the next few months to figure out, there's some, in the middle of all of this pandemic, there's been some good things that have come out of it, which is that we've learned that we can do a few things a little bit more simply than we've done in the past. in terms of allowing creativity with business. And so that's something to learn from there. The Williston one has reduced its parking standards, which is great. But I guess they're still catching up to you. I do have one other thing under other business. I apologize that I forgot about it earlier about your meeting schedule. So just a quick update for everybody. Your next meeting is October 27th, a Tuesday. The City Council is going to be meeting on November 2nd, the following Monday, to hold their public hearing and decide whether to extend interim zoning. I think it's their hope and expectation that commissioners would be able to give a status report on how things are going with this project. I wanted to inquire with you about how you might feel about having a second meeting that same week of the 27th. The first meeting would be to go over the actual language for subdivisions and master plans, which will be ready at the end of this week. And the second one might be to sort of circle back on all this natural resources work that you've done over the last month or so and kind of sew it up and be ready to talk about it. So I want to float that out to you and see whether commissioners.
Why don't you shoot out a doodle poll and see what people can do? But conceptually, I'm fine with that.
Me too.
Me too. Would we be ready by then to begin discussions about warning a public hearing on either of those two before the city council meeting?
Let me think about it. Let me think about that tomorrow morning after I've sort of digested where we're at.
Seems like a great goal.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I had.
Okay.
So motion to approve the minutes of September 22nd.
Second.
Okay, great. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Right?
Aye.
Unanimous. Perfect. Okay, we are adjourned.
Cool.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Good job, Jess.
Bye. Thanks. And thank you so much for this, Paul.
Of course.
Thanks. The mapping was awesome.